Let's begin to tear down this Yamaha MT2X. If all you were doing was accessing the transport in order to change belts or so on, you wouldn't actually need to remove any of the plastic caps on the knobs, sliders. Really the only one that's going to come away when you first open the case is the cap on this pitch control here. But since I'm going to be removing the mixer from the upper part of the case later on, I'm just going to go ahead and remove all these knobs and caps first. Anything that's like a 2 or 3 position switch, the plastic caps are mounted from the rear and you can't take them off. But anything where it's a slider or a knob with a continuous range of motion, then it's going to come off from the front here. I'm using this blue plastic spudging tool. Spudging tool is what you would usually use to remove car upholstery if you want to order some cheap implement like this to help you, but just anything that won't scratch the plastic will work. That's me removed all of them now. There's only 3 types, these round ones. Forgotten to take them off, I'll take them off in a second. For the monitor controls, the pan, we've got larger caps for the main channel faders and the master fader, and then everything else is this little oblong piece of plastic. I suppose you could argue from a usability point of view that makes it a little bit harder to read what's happening on this, that so many of the controls are visually similar, but from the point of view of putting it back together, it's actually quite nice that there aren't too many things to put in the wrong place. All the case screws look like this. Here they are beside a ruler for a sense of scale. So they're about 30 centimeters long, shallow angle, and that's usually what you see going into plastic mounting posts, which is the case here. If you're going to turn the unit over like this, then do put it down on a soft surface. I've got this fancy fabric folded over several times, so I'm good. And you can see the holes beside the red bits of tape. That's the 7 holes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Where's the 7th one? It must be that one there. I've missed out the tape. But that's the location of 7 of those screws that I just showed you. With those removed, I suggest that you lift the case up slightly and then push forward, because these little bits of plastic are going to catch on the buttons of the transport below. But once you've got that part free, then you're going to want to push it back this way and it's going to fold out like a book from the rear surface, the reason being that the connecting cables between the upper and lower boards are closer to this edge than they are to this one. Just pulling the camera back slightly so you can see everything. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 cables that are coming from this bottom board, a big clump joining up to this mixer board. Some of them do have the same number of pins, so there is some scope for you to get these mixed up when you put them back in. As well as referring to my own video footage or any photos that I've taken during a teardown, my main method for dealing with situations like this is to get multiple colours of permanent marker. This one has got pink both on the plastic of the connector and the header, and then all these other connectors I've colour coded as well. So these 3 have all got green. That's because they're on a clump. One of them's got 2 pins, one of them's got 3 pins. So I'll keep on unplugging these. One with 3 pins into a red plastic connector there. One of those ones that was coloured green there. That's into a black connector here. It's just below this power switch. Got 5, 2, and a, let me count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pin there. You can see I'm just pulling these out by hand. The cables are pretty thick, so there's not much risk of them breaking. If you wanted to be really cautious, you could grab the edges of the connector with a pair of pliers and pull on that so that you don't put any strain in the wire. 5-pin connector there. There's a pair here, behind there. One's got 3 cables, the other's got 4 cables, and then last of all, there's this one over bottom left edge as I look at the board that's got 6 cables on it. upper and lower parts are separate from each other. Probably one of the first things you're going to want to do if you're taking one of these apart is establish whether the health of the rubber parts and the cassette player is okay. Then probably the first thing you'd actually want to do is disconnect this cassette player. So we've got 3 headers here coming from the magnetic heads. I think the way that this is split up is we've got 2 tracks of play record head here and another 2 tracks of play record head here. Those cables look pretty sturdy. Sometimes they're very thin for that application, but this one is, yeah. Pull them out by hand, and then this 8-pin one is the negative and positive lead for all 4 segments of the arrays head. And then we can see that there is a cable coming from this power board here up to this board that's got the tape speed, I think that's the DBX on off, I need to remember, and user pitch control. It's also got the counter on it, and these 2 little calibration pots are for setting the centre position of this pitch control at exactly 3 3/4 inches per second and 1 7/8 inches per second. Unplug that. I think that's all the cable connections. We'll check that again in a minute. Oh, there's at least one more, which is to this socket here that's held on with just 1 screw. I'm using the same size of screwdriver all the way through this build. And what's nice about this build, in fact, is that there's only the 3 screw types. There's the long one that we already took out of the case. That's the only application that type of screws used. There's a longer version of this screw in just 3 that's part of how the jack socket's attached to the mixer board. We'll look at that soon, but pretty much all of the screws in this build are like this. So maybe 10 to 15 millimeters in length into plastic mounting posts, and you've got a standard screw you'd have around the house size of cross head on there. So if we lift that up, you can see that there is a little header and connector here. I was pulling on the wrong one. This one goes down to the bottom board, so you could detach that completely. I'll leave that in for now. Right, I think that's all the cables that we can unplug. Now I'm going to unscrew it from the chassis. Notice that there are holes here, but they're pass-through holes. That kind of screw comes through and joins to the upper case. So that really only leaves us with 2 screws either side of the motor. There's 3 attaching this board to mounting posts below. We need to get them out because there's a lot of cables that are soldered rather than they have connectors at the end joining this little board to the main cassette transport. And then we've got 1 screw in this top left corner of the main chassis of the cassette player, and there are 2 earth connectors there. I'll take this one off on camera. The purpose of little connectors like this is to ensure that everything that's in the circuit shares a common ground. If you don't have a common ground, then you can get all sorts of noise pollution and buzzing issues. You'll get things like motor noise, audible in the audio path and so on if these things aren't connected right. So this one's leading off to the head, so the metal casing of the head is connected to common ground. And this one's, so everything on this board is connected to common ground, and then one of these sockets that we unplugged earlier will be ensuring that anything is connected to ground, and the other board is also connected to this. And effectively the negative points all over the circuit make one kind of networked cloud. Make sure these sorts of things are attached if you're hearing some buzzing and noising. I'll go off screen and remove those other 5 screws. With those 5 screws removed, this is going to come away completely. Now you'll notice there's an embossed GEC into the base of this. I don't know exactly who GEC were, but they seem to have produced this transport for several manufacturers that I'm aware of. Yamaha, Fostex and Tascam at least all use some variant of this. I've done a whole long series about taking apart this because honestly it's a pretty finicky one to get right. There's some common issues with it. It requires more disassembly, more lubrication and more replacement of parts than some transports I've worked with. It's maybe the only downside to this build, which is otherwise actually very simple and a kind of pleasure to work on, is that these transports are not the easiest to get working compared to the later models where it's, you know, tactile switches and logic controlled solenoids and stuff, they tend to be a little bit easier to work on. Works perfectly well once you get it going, but there's a lot of parts to remember where they go. But my videos cover that. Check the description for a link to the playlist with all the details of that, and it's also got details of belt sizes and so on. Since we're on the bottom half of the MT2X anyway, we'll continue to tear down this part of it, although under most circumstances you probably want to get at the mixer first for cleaning. Hopefully something like this, the only things that you'd have to solder underneath are things like these auxiliary sockets here, well, like fetch, send and return. Quite often when you have sockets mounted to the board like this, just the force of putting the jack socket in and taking it out can cause little breaks in the solder at the base, and that was actually the case in this unit as well as some of the other sockets that we'll see later. But certainly if you needed to do anything to do with the recorded playback amplifiers or noise reduction, the signal wasn't getting somewhere, then you'd need access to the underside of this. So I've removed all the screws necessary bar one. On this unit, for some reason, only this one, which has a conveniently placed icon depicting a screw. And these two had screws in them. I think I'll add an extra two because there are actually places for two more screws where my fingers are here. And then this board is connected to this one via this ribbon cable. It's possible to pull up. In fact, I'll just quickly show you at least this part of it. There's a little plastic cover, and then there's little metal pins in there, and then if you push down on those, they're like gripping the exposed metal ends of the ribbon cable. I hate these connectors because they're really difficult to put back in reliably once you've taken them out. That's my experience anyway. So anytime I encounter them, I just leave them. And so if I needed to get access to this board, I wouldn't detach it from this one. I would detach the entire thing, including the transformer and this little region select switch, which we'll come to in a minute. I'll just take it all out as one unit rather than fuck with that. Anyway, from this board, there was one screw here and one screw here, and then finally we've got this one. I'm just left that in so you can definitely see that it's got two ring connectors, and one of those is coming for metal shielding underneath here, and that's basically trying to protect these circuits that have audio signal on them from radio and electromagnetic interference. So anything that gets picked up as an antenna by this bit of metal shielding goes via this ring connector, joins to this ring connector, which is joined to circuit ground, and it goes into that big bit of metal that I was talking about earlier, and rather than appearing as extraneous noise in your signal path. So these two need to join together underneath the screw here so that that shielding is connected to circuit ground. I've also removed 4 of those screws. They're all the same size of screws from this internal transformer, and another 2 from this switch, which is where you change which region this unit is from. So this is a unit you could buy from US and use it in Japan, or buy from Japan and use it in UK or Australia or something. You don't need to buy a region specific version of one of this, or a step up or a step down transformer. Something I probably should have mentioned earlier, I've added black tape over these 2 points here. You'll see me touching these in quite a blasé way, because usually once the electricity comes out of the secondary side of a transformer like this, whether that's located inside the unit as it is in this model or in an external supply, the voltages are usually so small, the amperage is so small that really you're more likely to damage the unit with static from your body than the Porter Studio is going to harm you. However, the electricity coming out of your wall is potentially lethal. It can give you a burn, it can give you a painful shock. If it actually travels up your arm and through your heart, it can stop your heart and kill you. And these 2 points were in my region, the brown and the blue wire. I'm touching this because the thing's unplugged, right? There is no way in hell I'd be touching that if that was plugged in. And that's why I've put tape over the top, just in case I have an involuntary muscle spasm and touch those and kill myself. I would make sure it's unplugged, and just as a safety thing, I would just put some tape over there so you can't touch both of those with your left hand, and then in my case 240 volts goes up my arm, through my heart, stops it and kills me. Okay, so that bit there is dangerous, but pretty much everything else you could touch even with it on and you would be okay. Anyway, this power socket sort of slides out of a slot there. This socket, which is how the, what is it called, YMC2, so their kind of FSK MIDI synchronization solution, which you can sort of bolt on here, that's the data port for it. So if we slide those out, then I can tip this. Have I missed a screw? I just need to push up that from the outside first before tipping it, and all of that would come away well enough that you could get at the underside for soldering and so on. I mean, you're still going to be kind of attached to this case a little bit because the power cable is going through a socket here. I gather there's a specialist tool you can use to remove those. I don't have one because I've never been able to track down the exact name of it. But anyway, you've got access for soldering there anyway. And you can probably see, in fact, the fresh solder where I repaired these sockets. The third screw type, which I mentioned earlier, which is just a slightly longer version of this one, which is all through this build. The three of those are attaching this board here, which has all the input sockets and the headphone socket as well, to mounting posts below. I've left the last of those screws here. Take that out now. You can see that there are two ring connectors here. As above, so below. Shielding here is kind of acting as an antenna and picking up any radio interference or electromagnetic interference, and then it's shunting it down to circuit ground, which is like our grey water, you know, our sewage. So it's flushing that away so it doesn't get in with, oh god, I'm overextending the metaphor here, but it's not getting into the water that we would use to fill our kettle or have a bath with, right? It's keeping the audio path and all the junk in the system separate. Anyway, we also have three headers here. They've all got a different number of cables on them. So there's 2-pin one here, 4-pin one here. How many's that got? 6? Maybe 7. Anyway, detach those, and this board is going to come away completely. Again, you can see that I think that was the headphone socket that was broken, just the force of the jack socket going in and out. So you can see I've put fresh solder on there where there isn't any on these other ones. Oh no, that one needed fixed as well. You can see solder there is a bit shinier. This board that's got the monitor controls in it is held down by 3 screws here. In fact, I'll go off screen and take all the screws out in a minute. There's no point just showing you that. This mixer board is attached to the plastic case with 3 rows of screws. 1, 2, 3 here, 2 here, and then 1, 2, 3 here. Actually, there is a little diagram of a screw beside all the holes that have screws in them, whereas these ones which are passed through don't have the diagram of the screw beside them. So when you reassemble, only put screws back in ones where the picture is. I'll just go off screen and remove those. The screws are out, and then if we can lift up this board, wonder if you could detach that more. Possibly. It would involve, at the very least, cutting some cable ties, which are probably in a sensible place. So, you know, I think it's no problem to have that attached there and dangling off. And then we've got this sort of shielding where there's the metal anti-noise antenna on one surface and sort of felt to protect all these little sliders from dust on the other. You could now remove these sort of rear mounted switch caps if you wanted better access for cleaning. I've got a whole playlist about cleaning. I tend to use Servusol, agitate it, blow out the dirty contact cleaner with compressed air, repeat that process a number of times depending on how dirty the unit is, and then I follow up Deoxit FL100. They have 2 formulations of this stuff. They have a D, which is really for metal to metal surfaces, and this F for fader is for plastic to metal surfaces. And plastic to metal is really how all the pots as well as the faders on things like a Porter Studio, they'd fit that description. And the 100 means that it's 100%. You get a spray can where it's only 5%, the rest of it's contact cleaner. And the contact cleaner dissolves and leaves a residue of this stuff. I find it's not as effective as Servusol followed by this, and it's not as cost effective. If you're the kind of person that can't be bothered to take this apart and you're just going to like spray something into the holes in the plastic case and into the fader, then F5 It's a spray can. You're better doing that than using a contact cleaner that doesn't have this stuff in it. But if you can be bothered to get this out and use a really harsh contact cleaner and then this, that's a better combination. Serviceable have been bought out by this company, Contact Chemie. So it's still called Super 10, but it now looks like this and is called this. Really the only thing that remains to be removed is the door. There's also this pair of fixings here. Again, this is like just screw holes for the YMC2, the MIDI FSK unit that would bolt on there. I guess it goes into holes here. That's how it attaches. I won't bother to remove that, but I will just remove these two springs for the door, just to show you a little bit of plastic work I've done on this unit. It arrived with the door in two parts, hinge had broken off one leg of the door, and even after I fixed that, the door was slipping out because some of the plastic parts that sort of hold the mechanism in place had broken as well. So I'm just going to lift that up. Right, you can see I have used spin welding to fix this hinge in two places, and you can probably see as well that there's a certain amount of spin welding that's happened here to prevent these little pegs in the hinges, prevent that from coming out. I've got videos on the subject, but essentially what's happening here is you put either an ABS plastic rod or this little what is that intending for? I think this is actually intended for engraving metal, this tool. If you put this in and turn the drill up to high speed, the friction actually causes the plastic to melt. And a process is a bit like welding, you can actually add plastic. So, you know, that's what I've done here. I've actually melted into the acrylic that the door's made into and melted white plastic. It's gone along there, and when it comes out of that process, it's usually quite lumpy and can be too thick to go through the recesses if you're fixing something like that. So then if you get an engraving tool like that, that'll very quickly wear that down. Then you can do the finishing touches with jeweler's files like this. You can get a set of these for maybe £3-5 my money off Amazon or something. This combination of techniques, you can add or remove plastic as you need it to fix things like that. Anyway, I hope you found that helpful. Thanks for sticking about to the end. If you want to see more teardowns like this, repair stuff, reviews, tutorials, all things tape themed, subscribe to the channel. I do a lot of this stuff. If you found this helpful, like the video. It blesses me in the eyes of the algorithm and helps get my shit hot info into the eyeballs of as many tapeworms as possible. If you want to see very specific and sort of vlogish stuff about my repair process, consider signing up to my Patreon. Make it very cheap to join, and I do quite a bit of exclusive content out there, as well as, you know, making sure that my patrons are top of the queue to get questions answered help. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.